Unlock the power of your mind and transform your life starting today. In this video, you will discover how to educate yourself daily, expand your thinking, and push beyond limits with practical strategies you can apply immediately. From building micro-learning routines to filtering distractions and amplifying insight, each concept is designed to sharpen your mind and strengthen your habits. Follow along as we break down 10 actionable steps that will help you grow intellectually, emotionally, and strategically. I'm Jessica from Premium Audiobooks, bringing you the best life-changing knowledge. Subscribe now for more content that empowers your mind every single day. Number 1. Build micro-learning into routines. Every great transformation begins in ordinary moments. Not in dramatic breakthroughs, not in extraordinary events, but in the quiet choices repeated each day. The idea of educating yourself daily often sounds heavy, demanding, and time-consuming. Many people imagine stacks of books, long study hours, and rigid schedules. That image discourages more people than it inspires. Real daily education works differently. It grows in small pieces, tucked into the flow of normal life. When learning becomes part of routine, not a special event, it stops feeling like work and starts feeling like breathing. Microlearning is the practice of absorbing small amounts of focused knowledge repeatedly over time. It respects the reality of modern life, where attention is scattered and schedules are full. It does not require perfect conditions or endless motivation. It only asks for consistency. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, one idea at a time. Over weeks and months, these small moments compound into deep understanding and lasting change. This is the quiet power most people underestimate. The human mind is shaped by what it touches every day. Just as a river is shaped by the land it moves across, your thinking is shaped by what you expose it to repeatedly. If your routines are filled with distraction, your mind becomes restless. If your routines are empty, your mind grows dull. If your routines contain steady learning, your mind becomes sharp, disciplined, and resilient. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you settle into the level of your system. Building micro-learning into routines means attaching learning to habits that already exist. It means using the structure of your day as a delivery system for growth. You already wake up. You already eat. You already travel, wait, rest, and prepare for sleep. These moments are not wasted time, they are unclaimed classrooms. When knowledge flows through these moments, education becomes automatic rather than forced. The morning is the first opportunity. The mind is quiet then, less polluted by noise and emotion. Instead of reaching for instant distraction, a short dose of learning can reset the direction of the entire day. One page of a thoughtful book, one short lesson from a meaningful source, one concept written and reflected on for a few minutes. This seeds the mind with purpose before the world begins demanding your attention. Over time, this simple ritual rewires how you approach your day. You stop reacting and start directing. Movement-based routines are another powerful anchor. Many people shower, walk, commute, exercise, or prepare meals daily without thought. These moments often drift into autopilot, yet the body moving is a perfect companion for the mind learning. Audiobooks, recorded lectures, language practice, or spoken reflections can turn these physical routines into mental workouts. While the body builds strength or completes tasks, the mind absorbs ideas that shape perspective and judgment. Waiting is one of the most overlooked opportunities for microlearning. Lines, traffic, delays, transitions between tasks, all are treated as dead time. Yet these moments, though small, add up to hours every week. A single insight reviewed during a wait can change how the next decision is made. A short reading during a pause can plant a thought that works quietly in the background all day. Waiting time becomes preparation time for a wiser response later. Evening routines carry a different kind of power. What the mind touches before sleep often settles deep into memory. A short reflection, a review of one meaningful idea from the day, or a brief study session can solidify lessons and shape subconscious patterns. This is not about cramming information. It is about calmly feeding the mind what you want it to grow into. The final thoughts of the day quietly influence tomorrow's behavior. The strength of microlearning is not found in intensity. It is found in rhythm. Intensity burns fast and fades. Rhythm endures. Big efforts impress the ego. Small daily efforts rewire the identity. When learning is ordinary, it becomes permanent. The difference between those who grow steadily and those who stall is rarely intelligence. It is almost always consistency disguised as routine. To build these routines realistically, start by lowering the barrier to action. The habit must be so small that it feels almost too easy to skip, yet meaningful enough to matter if done daily. 5 focused minutes are more powerful than an hour attempted once a week. A single paragraph studied deeply is more valuable than a chapter skimmed without attention. The goal is not volume. The goal is reliability. Pairing is one of the most effective strategies. Attach learning to a habit that already happens without effort. While making coffee, read one quote that challenges your thinking. While brushing your teeth, listen to a short lesson. While walking, reflect on a principle you want to live by. The human brain is wired to follow patterns. When learning rides on existing habits, resistance fades. Environment shapes behavior more than willpower ever could. If your environment makes learning difficult, discipline will eventually break. If your environment makes learning effortless, discipline becomes unnecessary. Keep books where your hands naturally reach. Keep educational audio ready where your phone connects to speakers. Remove friction from learning and add friction to distraction. What flows easily gets repeated. Another key is intentional limitation. The modern world overwhelms with endless information. Microlearning thrives on selectivity. Choose a few deeply meaningful sources instead of grazing endlessly across shallow content. Repetition from quality sources builds insight faster than novelty from random ones. Depth comes from returning to the same wisdom over time and seeing new layers each path. Tracking strengthens commitment. Not in a rigid, obsessive way, but in a quiet acknowledgement of effort. A simple mark on a calendar, a brief note in a journal, or a digital streak tracker reinforces identity. The brain begins to associate daily learning with self-respect. Each completed day becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. The emotional side of microlearning is often ignored, yet it is just as important as the intellectual side. Growth feels slow at first, invisible. The mind craves quick results. This creates frustration and doubt. Here, discipline must replace excitement. The Stoic understanding reminds that the reward of action is not praise or speed, but alignment with virtue and purpose. Progress measured in months, not moments, is the kind that reshapes a life. There will be days when energy is low and motivation disappears. On those days, microlearning becomes the perfect ally. When the goal is small, the excuse has nowhere to hide. Even one mindful minute preserves the chain. The power is not in what is learned that day, but in refusing to break the rhythm that defines the future. Over time, microlearning does something subtle and profound. It changes how you see time itself. Instead of blocks to be endured, moments become resources to be invested. Instead of waiting for ideal conditions, you grow within real ones. Instead of dreaming about transformation, you live it quietly through small choices. The practical results appear slowly but unmistakably. Vocabulary sharpens, judgment improves. Emotional reactions shorten, curiosity deepens, confidence stabilizes because it is built on earned understanding instead of borrowed opinion. You stop feeling rushed by the world and begin feeling grounded within it. This is not the loud confidence of ego, but the steady confidence of preparation. Microlearning also reshapes how failure is experienced. Since progress is measured daily in small steps, mistakes lose their power to derail the journey. Missed days are seen not as proof of weakness, but as reminders to return to the path. The mind that learns daily becomes patient with itself, because it understands growth as a process rather than an event. As this rhythm solidifies, something remarkable occurs. Learning stops being something you do. It becomes part of who you are. You begin to notice lessons everywhere, in conversations, in challenges, in other people's mistakes, in your own reactions. Life itself becomes the curriculum. Books and lessons no longer feel separate from reality. They illuminate it. The ultimate purpose of microlearning is not to collect information. It is to refine character and judgment. Knowledge alone does not create wisdom. Repeated reflection woven into daily action does. When small lessons shape small choices consistently, those choices shape habits, and those habits shape destiny. There is no dramatic moment when this transformation announces itself. No announcement, no applause. Only the quiet realization one day that your thinking is clearer than it used to be, your responses calmer than before, your decisions more deliberate than impulsive. You become harder to manipulate, slower to anger, quicker to understand. Growth becomes visible not in what you know but in how you live. To build microlearning into routines is to accept that greatness is built privately. It is to choose long-term strength over short-term stimulation. It is to bet on the invisible instead of the immediate. Each small lesson becomes a brick. Each daily repetition becomes mortar. Over time, without fanfare, a fortress of disciplined thought rises within you. The world will always reward noise and spectacle, but quiet preparation outlasts both. While others chase motivation, you cultivate rhythm. While others wait for time, you invest moments. While others consume endlessly, you select carefully. And in doing so, you shape a mind that cannot be easily shaken by chaos or deceived by illusion. True education is not measured by certificates or applause. It is measured by the quality of your decisions when no one is watching. It is measured by your ability to remain steady under pressure, clear under confusion, and purposeful under temptation. Microlearning, practiced daily, is one of the surest roads to that kind of inner strength. Today does not require a grand plan. It only requires one small deliberate act, repeated tomorrow and the next day, and the next. The path is not dramatic. It is disciplined. It is not fast. It is faithful. And through that quiet faithfulness, the mind grows beyond its former limits, not through force, but through fluency of habit. Number 2. Question assumptions through daily journaling. Every human being lives inside a story shaped by unnoticed beliefs. These beliefs decide what feels possible, what feels dangerous, and what feels unchangeable. Most people never consciously choose these beliefs. They inherit them from childhood, culture, failure, praise, fear, and repetition. Over time, these assumptions harden into invisible walls. A person may believe they are bad at money, weak under pressure, unlucky in love, incapable of leadership, or destined to struggle. These ideas feel like facts because they are rarely questioned, yet most of them were never proven. They were simply repeated until they sounded true. Daily journaling is one of the most powerful tools for breaking these silent agreements with limitation. It creates distance between you and your thoughts. It turns vague emotion into clear language. It exposes patterns that would otherwise remain hidden. Most importantly, it forces assumptions into the open where they can be tested, challenged, refined, or discarded. A thought written on paper no longer controls you in the same way. It becomes something you can look at, analyze, and reshape. Assumptions operate quietly. They speak in absolute terms. Always. Never. Everyone. No one. I can't. This will fail. People are against me. I'm not built for this. When these ideas stay in the mind, they feel real and unquestionable. When they are written down, they lose their authority. You begin to see how often you confuse feeling with fact. Journaling does not exist to flatter you. It exists to tell you the truth about how you think. The purpose of questioning assumptions is not to attack yourself. It is to free yourself. Many self-imposed limits survive only because they have never been examined. The journal becomes a private courtroom, where your beliefs must present evidence. What proof supports this idea? Where did it originate? Has it always been true? Is it true for everyone? Is it serving growth or preserving comfort? These questions separate inherited thinking from intentional thinking. Emotion distorts perception. When anger rises, the mind assumes threat. When fear appears, the mind assumes danger. When disappointment strikes, the mind assumes failure is permanent. Without reflection, these assumptions turn into decisions. The journal slows this process. It gives emotion time to cool and truth time to surface. Writing transforms reaction into response. The Stoic discipline begins here, not in theory, but in daily observation of one's own inner world. A practical daily journaling habit does not require elegant language or perfect grammar. It requires honesty. The most useful journal is not written for an audience. It is written for clarity. One page, one situation, one honest examination. What did I assume today? About myself, about others, about outcomes, about effort, about worth. Most people are shocked when they see how repetitive their assumptions are. The same fears echo across different situations with different disguises. Questioning does not weaken confidence. Blind confidence is fragile. Examined confidence is resilient. When you know why you believe something, you can defend it without becoming defensive. When you discover a belief has no foundation, you gain the power to change it without feeling ashamed. Strength grows from understanding, not from denial. The act of daily writing also trains attention. Thoughts move quickly in the mind and fade just as fast. On paper, they slow down. Patterns emerge. You begin to notice which assumptions return under stress, which appear during conflict, and which surface when silence falls. This awareness alone changes behavior. You catch a false belief mid-sentence and feel its influence weaken. The mind becomes less impulsive because it is no longer ruled entirely by hidden scripts. There is also a deeper layer to journaling that goes beyond analysis. It reconnects you with your values. Not what you say matters, but what your daily writing reveals about what actually matters to you. Repeated frustration points to repeated expectations. Repeated resentment points to unspoken boundaries. Repeated fear points to fragile attachments. Writing exposes the gap between who you want to be and how you are living. This gap is not meant to shame you. It is meant to guide you. Many people avoid this process because they fear what they might discover. Yet discomfort is the entrance to freedom. You cannot remove a chain you pretend is not there. Questioning assumptions may unsettle familiar comfort, but it also releases buried strength. You begin to realize how many limits were self-assigned and how much energy was wasted obeying ideas that were never earned. The journal is also a training ground for discipline. Setting aside a few minutes each day to write is not about creativity. It is about consistency. The mind resists examination, the same way the body resists exertion. Yet both grow through structured stress. When you write daily, even on days when nothing feels clear, you reinforce the habit of reflection. Over time, the resistance weakens and the clarity strengthens. The true transformation comes when questioning becomes automatic. You stop accepting first impressions as final judgments. You begin to pause when your mind declares certainty. This pause is power. It interrupts the chain between thought and action. Many regrets are born from unexamined assumptions acted upon at full speed. Journaling trains the pause that protects wisdom. Another quiet benefit of daily journaling is emotional regulation. When feelings remain unexpressed, they often surface as irritability, withdrawal, or impulsive behavior. Writing gives emotion a safe channel. Instead of spilling into relationships or decisions, it is processed privately. You become less reactive, not because you suppress feeling, but because you understand it. Stoic calm is not emotional numbness. It is emotional clarity. Over weeks of daily writing, false narratives begin to crumble. You may discover that what you called laziness was actually fear. What you labeled as fate was actually habit. What you defined as weakness was actually exhaustion. This reframing does not excuse responsibility. It sharpens it. Once you see the real cause, you can choose a real solution. Questioning assumptions through journaling also reshapes how you view others. Many conflicts persist because of untested stories we tell about people's motives. He meant to hurt me. She doesn't care. They always exclude me. Writing these assumptions down reveals how little evidence usually supports them. Compassion grows where certainty once stood. You respond with curiosity instead of hostility. Relationships heal not because others change, but because your interpretation becomes more accurate. The most powerful journal entries are often the most uncomfortable to write. They confront denial. They expose contradictions. They reveal where action and intention no longer align. This discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is proof of growth. The mind resists change even when change is necessary. Writing is the steady pressure that dissolves that resistance over time. The discipline of daily journaling also cultivates patience. Answers do not always arrive immediately. Sometimes clarity unfolds slowly across weeks of reflection. Stoic understands that truth matures through persistence, not haste. Each entry becomes a thread. Over time, these threads weave a wider understanding of your own nature. Journaling is not about fixing everything at once. It is about noticing one assumption at a time and loosening its grip. Small insights reshape large outcomes when applied consistently. A single false belief corrected can alter years of behavior. A single hidden fear exposed can release decades of self-sabotage. As this practice deepens, the tone of your inner dialogue begins to change. Harsh judgments soften into observations. Emotional reactions mature into measured responses. Ego-driven stories give way to evidence-based thinking. You become less attached to being right and more committed to being honest. This shift alone transforms how you learn, decide, and lead. Daily journaling also strengthens self-trust. When you examine your own thoughts regularly, you stop being a stranger to yourself. You understand your triggers, your values, your blind spots, and your strengths. This self-knowledge creates stability. You are less easily manipulated by praise or shaken by criticism, because your identity is rooted in understanding rather than approval. Over time, questioning assumptions becomes a form of quiet rebellion against automatic living. You refuse to outsource your thinking to fear, habit, or opinion. You become the author rather than the character in your mental story. This is where true independence begins. The discipline of writing daily, even when nothing feels urgent, is what preserves clarity when everything becomes urgent. The mind trained in reflection does not panic easily. It recognizes emotional storms without being ruled by them. It does not chase certainty in chaos. It returns to principles. The journal becomes a mirror that does not flatter and does not deceive. It shows you not who you wish you were, but who you are becoming through your daily choices. It exposes both progress and stagnation without judgment. This honesty is the foundation of real growth. Questioning assumptions through daily journaling is not therapy. It is training. Training the mind to pause before concluding. Training the will to resist comforting lies. Training the character to choose truth over ego. Training the future to unfold with intention rather than inertia. The freedom gained through this discipline is quiet but profound. You no longer feel trapped by unnamed forces. You recognize where control genuinely lies. You stop fighting imaginary enemies and begin working on real causes. You become less swept away by moods and more guided by reason. In the end, daily journaling does not merely document your life, it refines it. It teaches the mind to see clearly before it acts. It replaces assumption with awareness and reaction with response. Over time, this clarity shapes choices. And choices shape destiny. The hand that writes today quietly prepares the path your feet will walk tomorrow. Number 3. Curate information diets. Intentionally daily, every mind is shaped by what it consumes. Just as the body becomes the result of repeated meals, the mind becomes the result of repeated information. Thoughts do not appear from nowhere. They are built from what you read, hear, watch, scroll through, and listen to each day. Most people pay careful attention to their physical diet, but leave their mental diet completely unmanaged. They allow any source, any opinion, any noise to enter without question. Then they wonder why focus is fragile, judgment is clouded, and emotions swing without warning. The quality of your thinking can never rise above the quality of what you feed it. An intentional information diet begins with the recognition that attention is life's most limited resource. Time can be measured, money can be replaced. Attention, once spent, is gone forever. Every article, video, message, and conversation either strengthens the mind or weakens it. None are neutral. Even harmless distraction carries a cost when it replaces depth with noise. The Stoic understanding reminds that self-mastery begins with guarding the gates of the mind. What enters repeatedly will eventually rule. Modern life is designed for mental overconsumption. Endless updates, breaking news cycles, social feeds, and instant opinions create the illusion of staying informed while quietly exhausting the nervous system. The mind becomes overstimulated yet undernourished. You may know many fragments, but possess little wisdom. You may feel busy yet rarely grounded. This is not the result of laziness. It is the result of unfiltered intake. Curating information intentionally does not mean isolating yourself from the world. It means choosing with care what deserves a place in your awareness. It means replacing reflexive scrolling with deliberate selection. It means deciding in advance what kind of mind you want to build, then feeding it accordingly. A distracted mind is easy to influence. A trained mind is difficult to mislead. The first step is awareness of what you already consume. Most people underestimate their intake because it happens in short bursts repeated throughout the day. A minute here, 5 minutes there, an idle check that turns into an hour. These fragments accumulate into a powerful shaping force. When you observe your daily inputs honestly, patterns emerge. Certain sources consistently agitate. Others quietly inform. Many exist only to steal attention without offering anything in return. Emotional response is a reliable signal. If a source repeatedly produces anxiety, anger, envy, or restlessness, it is shaping the mind in that direction regardless of how informative it claims to be. Information that leaves you unsettled without offering clarity is not nourishment, it is stimulation. The Stoic path favors what steadies the spirit and sharpens judgment. The mind requires both knowledge and silence. Constant input, even if educational, eventually dulls discernment. Intentionally leaving space each day where no new information enters allows understanding to settle. Reflection converts knowledge into wisdom. Without that pause, the mind becomes a storage room rather than a workshop. Curating your information includes curating your quiet. Daily intentional curation also demands boundaries. Not every message deserves immediate attention. Not every opinion deserves your consideration. Not every trend deserves your reaction. Boundaries protect depth. Without them, the mind becomes reactive, always responding, never leading. You may feel connected to everything, yet anchored to nothing. The principle of selective exposure is simple but demanding. Remove what weakens the mind, and make access to what strengthens the mind effortless. This often requires discomfort at first. The absence of familiar noise can feel like boredom or restlessness, yet beneath that restlessness is the opportunity for clarity. The mind, deprived of shallow stimulation, begins seeking deeper nourishment. Repetition is what gives information its power over you. A single negative headline rarely alters character. Hundreds over weeks quietly shape worldview. A single moment of comparison rarely destroys contentment. Repeated exposure slowly poisons satisfaction. Curation is not about isolated choices. It is about cumulative influence. What you allow daily becomes who you become eventually. Intentional information intake strengthens emotional stability. You become less reactive not because life becomes calmer, but because your nervous system becomes less constantly provoked. Many emotional swings are not caused by real-life events, but by repeated exposure to interpreted crises. Limiting these inputs restores proportion. You begin responding to what is real rather than to what is merely broadcast. This practice also refines concentration. Scattered attention is often the result of fragmented consumption. Jumping rapidly between topics trains the mind to expect constant novelty. Depth feels uncomfortable to a mind trained on rapid switches. Intentional curation retrains patience. When fewer sources compete for your focus, the remaining ones receive full attention. This is how deep learning becomes possible again. Curating your information diet also strengthens character. Ideas shape values. Values shape action. When your sources prioritize outrage, your behavior tilts toward conflict. When your sources glorify excess, your standards drift. When your sources elevate discipline and clarity, these qualities quietly gain ground within you. One of the hardest habits to break is passive consumption during moments of fatigue. When energy is low, the mind seeks the easiest stimulation available. This is often where the most damaging intake occurs. Late-night scrolling, impulsive browsing, or endless commentary feed the mind when its defenses are weakest. Recognizing this pattern allows intervention at its most vulnerable point. Protecting the mind when it is tired is an act of self-respect. Intentional intake does not require perfection, it requires direction. You will encounter noise simply by moving through the world. The discipline lies in refusing to linger in it. Exposure is unavoidable. Engagement is a choice. You can encounter without internalizing. You can observe without absorbing. This distinction defines mastery. A curated information diet also restores a sense of mental dignity. You stop feeling mentally crowded. The internal voice becomes clearer because it is no longer drowned out by constant external opinion. Original thought becomes possible again, not because you reject others' ideas, but because you no longer consume them in excess. Over time, this practice reshapes how you relate to knowledge itself. You stop chasing novelty for its own sake. You begin seeking depth, meaning, and application. You measure information not by how entertaining it is, but by how it improves judgment and discipline. Learning becomes purposeful rather than compulsive. There is also a moral dimension to this discipline. What you repeatedly watch, share, and endorse contributes to collective attention. By curating your own intake, you quietly withdraw support from systems that profit from agitation and addiction. This is not withdrawal from society. It is participation with principle. The effects of an intentional information diet are not immediately dramatic. They unfold subtly. One day you realize your mind feels lighter. Another day you notice you are less easily provoked. Later you find that your conversations become more thoughtful. Eventually decisions are made with greater clarity and slower regret. These changes may seem small in isolation. Together they redefine the quality of your life. This discipline also restores time. Hours once lost to aimless consumption are returned without fanfare. That time becomes available for thought, work, relationships, or rest. You gain not only mental clarity but practical capacity. A quieter mind moves more efficiently. The greatest illusion promoted by constant information flow is that more input equals more intelligence. Wisdom grows from selection, not saturation. A sharp mind is not the one that knows everything, but the one that can distinguish what matters from what merely shouts. An intentionally curated information diet also strengthens independence. When your perceptions are not continually shaped by trending outrage or viral opinion, you become harder to manipulate. You think before adopting conclusions. You see situations more fully. You resist emotional contagion. This quiet independence is the mark of true inner sovereignty. Every day presents countless invitations to surrender attention. Each refusal strengthens the will. Each deliberate choice reinforces identity. Over time, the act of choosing becomes natural. You no longer feel deprived by what you exclude. You feel protected by what you preserve. The mind, properly nourished, develops a different relationship with uncertainty. It becomes comfortable not knowing everything immediately. It tolerates ambiguity without panic. It waits for sufficient information before reacting. This patience prevents countless errors driven by haste. The discipline of curating information is not rooted in fear of ideas. It is rooted in respect for the mind's limited capacity. A vessel that is always full cannot be refined. Empty space is where understanding settles. Eventually, you stop thinking of this practice as restriction and begin experiencing it as refinement. The noise fades. The signal sharpens. Thought strengthens. The internal world becomes more ordered, more resilient, more capable of reasoned response rather than impulsive reaction. In the end, an intentional information diet is an act of daily self-authorship. You choose which voices enter your mind and which do not. You decide which narratives you rehearse and which you release. You shape the raw material from which your judgments, habits, and character are built. Quietly, without ceremony, this discipline determines the quality of your inner life, and through it, the quality of every outward result that follows. Number 4. Turn idle time into classrooms. There are moments scattered through every day that appear empty at first glance. Minutes spent waiting, commuting, standing in line, sitting between tasks, or drifting before sleep. Most people experience these moments as pauses to be filled with distraction or impatience. They reach for whatever is easiest to occupy attention, yet these same moments, when used with intention, quietly shape the difference between stagnation and growth. Idle time is not truly empty. It is unclaimed. What you claim it with determines whether it drains your life or strengthens it. Idle time feels harmless because it seems insignificant. A few minutes here, another few there. Yet, collected over months and years, these fragments form a large portion of a human life. A mind trained to waste these fragments grows accustomed to wasting larger opportunities. A mind trained to invest them learns to compound progress invisibly. The transformation does not come through heroic effort. It comes through the quiet discipline of using what others ignore. Turning idle time into a classroom begins with a shift in perception. Time itself is not the resource. Attention is. Two people can stand in the same line for the same length of time and leave with completely different inner results. One departs unchanged. The other departs having learned, reflected, or strengthened the mind. The difference is not in circumstance but in choice. Most idle moments are filled automatically. The hand moves before the thought forms. The mind seeks stimulation without asking whether it is nourishment. This reflex is not accidental. It has been trained by repetition, yet any reflex can be replaced by a more deliberate one through practice. Idle moments become classrooms when the mind is trained to recognize them as invitations, rather than interruptions. Many people believe that meaningful learning requires large blocks of dedicated time. This belief limits growth to rare windows of perfect conditions. The truth is simpler and more powerful. A single idea absorbed deeply can shape behavior more than a chapter skimmed without presence. Idle time offers frequent opportunities for focused contact with one small piece of knowledge. Over time, these pieces form a structure of understanding far stronger than sporadic effort. The nature of idle time is that it often arrives without warning. You do not schedule unexpected delays or unplanned pauses. The prepared mind carries its classroom with it. A prepared mind keeps questions ready, reflections alive, and learning tools accessible. The student of life does not wait for silence to appear. He recognizes it when it arrives. Turning waiting into learning does not require filling every silence with noise. Sometimes the most powerful classroom is within. Reflection itself is education. Observing your own reactions during idle moments teaches you more about yourself than many external lessons. Impatience reveals attachment. Restlessness reveals dependence on stimulation. Calm reveals sovereignty. Idle time becomes a mirror when you allow it. A disciplined mind learns to use stillness as training rather than as escape. In moments when nothing demands action, the mind can review a principle, revisit a recent mistake, rehearse a better response, or strengthen resolve. These inner rehearsals quietly improve outer performance. The Stoic tradition understood this deeply. The strongest battles are prepared for long before they arrive. There is also the discipline of portable learning. Carrying a book, an audio lesson, a language practice, or a written reflection ensures that idle time never lacks purpose. Yet purpose does not always mean information. Sometimes it means contemplation. Sometimes it means silence. The classroom is not always loud. One of the greatest errors of modern life is the belief that rest and growth are opposites. True rest is not mental numbness. It is a form of alignment where the mind recovers its clarity. Many distractions exhaust more than they restore. They feel like relief while quietly draining attention. Using idle time wisely does not eliminate rest. It replaces shallow rest with deep restoration. Turning idle time into a classroom also reshapes how you experience frustration. Delays lose some of their power to irritate when they become opportunities to learn. Impatience fades when waiting carries meaning. What once felt stolen is now invested. This shift alone reduces daily stress because resistance decreases. The classroom of idle time is not confined to devices or books. Life itself becomes the lesson. Watching how others speak, how they react under pressure, how they manage disappointment, how they express gratitude. These observations made during ordinary moments teach more about character than formal instruction. Every interaction becomes a demonstration of what to practice or what to avoid. Over time, the habit of learning during idle moments changes how the mind experiences boredom. Boredom is not the absence of stimulation. It is the absence of engagement. A curious mind rarely feels bored because it knows how to explore even the smallest moment. Curiosity transforms emptiness into possibility. This discipline also trains patience. When you stop rushing to escape idle moments, you strengthen the ability to remain present without agitation. Patience grows not from forced waiting, but from meaningful waiting. The capacity to sit with stillness without fleeing toward distraction is one of the quiet marks of inner strength. Idle time used well also becomes a reservoir of resilience. When pressure increases, when schedules tighten, when life grows demanding, the mind already trained in small moments has built reserves of clarity. Those who neglect idle time often discover too late that they have nowhere to retreat internally. Those who train in small moments carry stability with them. Another profound effect of this practice is the restoration of dignity to ordinary life. You no longer divide the day into important hours and meaningless gaps. Every segment of time becomes worthy of intention. This does not mean forcing productivity into every second. It means bringing awareness into every second. Awareness is what elevates the ordinary into the purposeful. The mind that learns in idle moments also becomes sharper at recognizing opportunity. When you are accustomed to extracting value from small spaces, you naturally notice possibility where others see inconvenience. This mindset extends beyond learning into every life domain. You become skilled at turning obstacles into resources. The subtle advantage of this discipline compounds invisibly. Those few minutes gathered day after day become hours. Those hours become weeks. Those weeks become a foundation of knowledge and clarity that appears to others as sudden progress. Yet it was built in the margins where few think to look. There is a kind of humility in studying during idle moments. It rejects the illusion that growth only happens in grand settings. It accepts that progress is forged quietly and without witnesses. This humility protects you from the need for constant validation. Your reward becomes internal, the steady sharpening of the mind. Turning idle time into classrooms also strengthens memory. Learning spaced throughout the day is retained more deeply than learning crammed into isolated sessions. The brain absorbs and integrates information more naturally when it arrives in small, repeated doses. What you study while waiting often returns unexpectedly when you least expect it. Over time, this habit reshapes identity. You begin to see yourself not as someone who fits learning into life when convenient, but as someone who lives as a student, wherever you are. This identity shift is more powerful than any technique. Behavior follows identity with little resistance. There is also a moral element to this discipline. Using idle time wisely honors the gift of time itself. Life is not measured only by major events. It is measured by how you use what lies between them. Squandered minutes quietly erode a life. Invested minutes quietly build one. The resistance to using idle time well often comes from discomfort with solitude. Silence exposes unprocessed thoughts. Stillness reveals hidden tension. Many people flee these encounters by drowning them in noise. Yet, what is avoided does not disappear. It waits. Idle time used intentionally invites these hidden layers into awareness, where they can be understood and refined. This practice also builds self-respect. Each time you choose growth over distraction in a small moment, you cast a vote for the person you are becoming. These votes accumulate into confidence grounded in action rather than affirmation. You trust yourself more because you witness your own discipline. The final transformation occurs quietly. A day arrives when you no longer search desperately for stimulation. When time opens, the mind has learned that emptiness is not threatening. It is fertile. You feel no urgency to escape a pause. You use it, or you rest in it with equal calm. Idle time becomes less about killing minutes and more about cultivating meaning. Some moments you learn from a page, some from a memory, some from silence. The classroom adapts to the season, but the student remains constant. In the end, turning idle time into classrooms is an act of quiet defiance against a world that teaches speed without direction and noise without substance. It is the refusal to waste what cannot be recovered. It is the decision to train when no one is watching, to learn when nothing demands it, to grow where others drift. This discipline does not announce itself. It simply works, shaping a life from the spaces that were once ignored. Number 5. Teach others to master knowledge. Most people believe knowledge is something you collect and guard. They treat learning like a private treasure, something to store away for personal advantage. This view quietly limits growth. Knowledge that remains locked inside the mind tends to weaken over time. It becomes brittle, unclear, and shallow. Knowledge that is shared is forced to become strong. When you teach what you know, you are no longer allowed to hide behind vague understanding. You must make ideas precise, test their truth, and confront the gaps you did not know were there. Teaching is not a generous act alone. It is a powerful discipline of self-mastery. When you attempt to explain a concept to another person, the mind enters a different mode of thinking. You can no longer rely on familiarity. You must rely on clarity. Confusion that felt harmless inside your own head becomes obvious when words fail to form. This exposure is uncomfortable at first. Ego resists being shown incomplete. Yet this discomfort is the gateway to mastery. The Stoic path favors exposure over illusion. It is better to feel ignorance for a moment than to carry it unknowingly for a lifetime. Teaching strips knowledge down to its core. You learn what is essential and what is decoration. You discover which principles can stand on their own and which collapse without support. In this way, teaching becomes a refining fire. What survives explanation becomes part of your true understanding. What cannot survive must be rebuilt. There is quiet discipline in guiding another mind. You must control impatience, simplify without distorting, and remain attentive to another person's pace, rather than your own pride. These qualities sharpen character as much as they sharpen intellect. You learn to value progress over performance. You learn that mastery is not proven by how complex your language sounds, but by how clearly another person can act on what you share. Teaching also changes how carefully you study. When your learning is only for yourself, it is easy to skim, to settle for partial understanding, to postpone deeper inquiry. When you know you will teach, the standard rises. You read with different eyes. You listen more closely. You ask better questions. Responsibility strengthens attention. The desire to serve another person's understanding elevates your own. There is a misconception that one must be an expert before teaching. This belief denies the reality of how mastery is built. You do not need to be at the summit to guide someone a few steps up the path. You only need to be one step ahead with honesty. Teaching from this position keeps ego in check. You are not performing authority. You are practicing clarity. Both teacher and learner advance together. The act of teaching also turns passive knowledge into applied knowledge. Ideas remain inert until they shape behavior. When you teach, you naturally give examples, create analogies, and connect concepts to real situations. These connections deepen your own comprehension. A principle you can link to life becomes part of your thinking structure rather than a borrowed phrase. Teaching trains memory in a way few other practices can. What you explain repeatedly becomes organized in long-term recall. The mind remembers what it must retrieve often. By teaching, you naturally rehearse knowledge in varied contexts. This spaced retrieval strengthens retention without requiring artificial memorization. There is also a moral force in teaching. To teach is to take responsibility for the accuracy and intention of what you share. You become careful not only with facts, but with impact. You learn to separate what is useful from what merely sounds impressive. This restraint cultivates integrity. You become less tempted to speak beyond your understanding because another person's growth is at stake. Helping others master knowledge also reveals how differently minds work. What seems obvious to you may appear invisible to another. Observing these differences expands your empathy and sharpens your communication. You learn that truth does not change, but the road to it varies. This understanding strengthens leadership because it replaces assumption with attention. Teaching exposes weak foundations quickly. When a learner asks why, and you cannot answer clearly, the flaw reveals itself without insult. This moment is not failure. It is guidance. It tells you exactly where to return and rebuild. Few disciplines provide such honest feedback with such precision. There is also a quiet confidence that emerges from teaching, not the loud confidence of dominance, but the steady confidence of grounded understanding. You no longer measure your worth by applause. You measure it by effectiveness. You know when you truly understand something because your explanation helps someone else act with clarity. The process of teaching reshapes how you relate to your own mind. You become more patient with confusion because you witness it daily in others. You see that learning is not a straight line, but a cycle of misunderstanding and correction. This awareness softens self-judgment and strengthens persistence. Teaching also acts as a mirror for your values. What you choose to teach reveals what you believe matters. Skills you emphasize, principles you repeat, warnings you give, all expose your priorities. Over time, this reflection can refine your own value system. You may notice inconsistencies between what you claim to value and what you actually transmit. This noticing is not a condemnation. It is a chance for alignment. There is also a practical advantage often overlooked. Teaching multiplies learning speed. One mind studying alone advances steadily. Two minds actively engaged accelerate each other. Insight travels faster through dialogue than through isolation. Questions surface angles you would not have discovered alone. Challenges clarify ideas that felt solid until tested. Teaching transforms learning into a living process rather than a solitary accumulation. Another hidden benefit is resilience against forgetting. Knowledge decays when unused. Skills weaken when they remain idle. Teaching forces continued use. Concepts stay sharp because they are exercised. In this way, teaching is maintenance as well as advancement. Teaching others also tempers pride. When you watch someone learn a concept you once struggled with, gratitude replaces arrogance. You remember the difficulty of your own early steps. This memory preserves humility, which protects against the stagnation that often follows early success. There is a subtle form of legacy that begins with teaching. Words shape thinking. Thinking shapes decisions. Decisions shape lives. When you pass understanding to another, you influence choices beyond your own reach. This influence does not require fame. It requires sincerity. A single lesson shared at the right moment can redirect the course of a life quietly and permanently. Teaching also strengthens your relationship with uncertainty. When you engage with questions you cannot immediately answer, you learn to say, "I do not know," without shame. This honesty preserves intellectual cleanliness. It keeps the mind open. The Stoic respects truth more than reputation. Teaching trains this respect daily. The discipline of teaching also refines listening. To teach effectively, you must first understand where the learner stands. This demands attention free of impatience. You cannot guide a person from your own position alone. You must meet them where they are. This skill transfers into every area of life. Relationships deepen. Conflict softens. Misunderstanding decreases. Teaching also challenges comfort. It pushes you into articulation, exposure, and responsibility. Silence is safe. Instruction carries risk. You may be misunderstood. You may be questioned. You may be corrected. Yet each risk expands capacity. Avoidance contracts it. The more you teach, the more clearly you see that mastery is not the absence of gaps, but the willingness to address them. Even the most seasoned guide continues to refine. Teaching does not signal the end of learning. It signals its maturation. There is a deeper layer beyond information itself. Teaching transmits attitude, how you approach problems, how you respond to mistakes, how you frame adversity. These are lessons conveyed without words. The learner often adopts not only your knowledge, but your manner of meeting challenges. In this way, teaching becomes character formation as much as intellectual transfer. Helping others master knowledge also keeps you connected to purpose. Learning for self-advancement alone can become narrow. Learning to uplift others broadens motivation. It attaches meaning to effort. Fatigue feels lighter when effort serves more than personal gain. Over time, the act of teaching reshapes your identity. You begin to see yourself as both student and guide. This dual identity stabilizes the ego. You are never too exalted to learn and never too small to contribute. This balance preserves momentum across decades. Teaching also sharpens ethical judgment. You become aware that knowledge is not neutral. It can heal or harm, depending on how it is used. This awareness deepens your sense of responsibility. You think not only about what is true, but about what is timely, what is constructive, and what is wise. The final transformation brought by teaching is internal. You stop hoarding understanding as protection and start sharing it as practice. You discover that mastery is not diminished by distribution. It is strengthened by it. What flows remains alive. What stagnates decays. To teach others to master knowledge is to accept that your growth is tied to the growth of those you help. It is to place your understanding into the open, where it can be tested, refined, and expanded. It is to choose clarity over concealment, service over display, process over prestige. In the quiet moments when a learner applies a principle you shared and begins to stand more firmly in life, you glimpse the true reward of this discipline, not recognition, not control, but the deep satisfaction of knowing that your effort has strengthened another mind. In that strengthening, your own understanding has also been deepened. This reciprocal growth is the hidden economy of teaching, where mastery multiplies rather than divides. Number 6. Track thinking growth with metrics. Most people say they want to grow, yet very few can clearly explain how their thinking has changed over time. They feel different, react a little better, or handle pressure with more control, but their progress remains vague. What is not measured often fades into assumption. The mind easily confuses effort with improvement and activity with advancement. That is why tracking thinking growth with clear, simple metrics is not a cold or mechanical habit. It is a discipline of awareness. It turns invisible progress into something you can observe, refine, and strengthen with intention. Growth of thought is subtle. It happens quietly, often without dramatic signals. You may become slightly more patient this month than last. You may recover from disappointment a little faster than before. You may recognize faulty reasoning sooner than you once did. These shifts are powerful, but they are easy to overlook. When they go unnoticed, motivation weakens. When they are tracked, discipline deepens. Measurement does not create pressure when used wisely. It creates clarity. Many resist the idea of measuring inner progress because they fear reducing the mind to numbers. This fear is understandable but misplaced. Metrics do not replace wisdom. They guide attention toward it. The mistake is not in measuring, but in measuring what does not matter. When you choose simple, meaningful indicators of thinking quality, you preserve depth while gaining structure. Tracking thinking growth begins with identifying what kind of mind you are building. Calm under stress, clarity in decision-making, emotional regulation, logical reasoning, self-awareness. Each of these qualities can be observed through behavior. The mind always reveals itself through action. You cannot directly see your thoughts changing, but you can see their effects. One powerful metric is reaction time to emotion. How long does irritation last before you regain composure? How quickly do you recover from disappointment? How fast do you recognize unnecessary fear? These are not abstract ideas. They can be observed daily. When recovery time shortens, thinking has strengthened even if the emotion still arises. Another meaningful indicator is decision clarity. Do you hesitate less in situations that once caused confusion? Are your choices guided more by principle and less by impulse? Do you revisit fewer decisions with regret? These patterns reveal how disciplined your reasoning has become. Consistency of behavior is another mirror of mental stability. A scattered mind produces erratic action. A trained mind produces steadiness. You may track how often you honor commitments, maintain routines, or complete focused work without distraction. Each of these reflects internal order. Language itself reveals thinking quality. The words you use in journaling or speech change as clarity grows. Over time, you may notice fewer absolute statements, fewer emotional extremes, and more balanced descriptions. This shift reveals that the mind is moving from reaction to reflection. Metrics are not judgments. They are signals. Their purpose is not to praise or punish, but to inform. When a number declines, the task is not self-attack. It is adjustment. When a number rises, the task is not pride. It is reinforcement. The Stoic approach values steady correction over emotional response. One danger in tracking growth is the desire for rapid improvement. Thinking does not evolve at the same speed as physical skill. It deepens slowly through repetition and reflection. A metric observed daily may appear unchanged for weeks before shifting noticeably. This slow pace is not failure. It is the natural rhythm of character formation. A simple weekly review often provides clearer insight than daily inspection. The distance of a few days reveals trends that individual moments conceal. A single difficult day does not represent decline. A pattern across time reveals direction. This perspective prevents discouragement and overconfidence alike. Another metric worth tracking is the quality of questions you ask yourself. Shallow questions signal shallow awareness. Precise questions signal a sharpening mind. Over time, your questions may move from "why is this happening to me?" toward "what is this teaching me?" This shift reflects a movement from victimhood toward responsibility. The ability to sit with uncertainty is also measurable through behavior. Do you rush to conclusions? Do you feel compelled to fill silence with opinion? Or can you pause without panic? The frequency of impulsive conclusions reveals how comfortable the mind is with incomplete information. Growth increases tolerance for ambiguity without surrendering reason. Habits of attention also expose thinking maturity. How often do you catch your mind drifting into unnecessary comparison? How quickly do you redirect focus when distraction appears? How aware are you of wasted time? Tracking moments of regained attention shows that awareness is becoming sharper. Another subtle metric is the tone of inner dialogue. While this may seem difficult to measure, written reflection makes it visible. Over weeks, the language you use to describe yourself and your challenges will reveal whether criticism is softening into correction or still trapped in contempt. A disciplined mind corrects without cruelty. Emotional range under pressure is also a revealing indicator. Do challenges compress your emotional responses into extremes, or do they teach nuance? The greater your capacity to feel without being ruled, the stronger your thinking has become. This is not emotional suppression, it is emotional sovereignty. Tracking thinking growth also refines motivation. When progress is visible, even in small measures, effort feels meaningful. The mind sees its own evolution and gains confidence in sustained practice. When progress feels invisible, discipline weakens. Measurement protects persistence. Another often ignored metric is the speed with which you admit error. A fragile mind defends itself excessively. A stable mind corrects itself quickly. The time between mistake and acknowledgement is a powerful indicator of intellectual humility and growth. Shorter distances here signal stronger foundations. The Stoic tradition values internal order more than external applause. Metrics align naturally with this view because they measure what truly matters rather than what is publicly displayed. You may appear calm to others while turbulence rages within. Metrics expose the truth gently and privately. One danger to avoid is using metrics as a weapon against yourself. Tracking is not meant to become a tribunal that condemns you for every fluctuation. It is meant to become a compass that corrects direction. When measurement becomes harsh, it loses its power to guide. Another error is tracking too many indicators at once. An overloaded system collapses under its own weight. A few carefully chosen metrics, observed consistently, outlast complex systems abandoned quickly. Simplicity preserves momentum. Tracking also improves memory of progress. The mind naturally recalls failures more vividly than gradual gains. Written metrics rebalance this bias. They preserve evidence of growth that emotion might otherwise hide. On difficult days, these records restore perspective. As this practice matures, you begin to observe not only outcomes but causes. You see which habits strengthen clarity and which weaken it. You notice how sleep, conversation, nutrition, solitude, and study influence cognition. These connections empower better design of daily life. Another quiet transformation is the shift from vague intention to deliberate training. Without metrics, growth is often hoped for. With metrics, growth is practiced. The difference between hope and practice defines the difference between desire and discipline. Tracking thinking growth also strengthens responsibility. You stop outsourcing your development to circumstances. Progress becomes something you engage with directly. You become both the observer and the builder of your own mind. This discipline deepens honesty. When numbers reveal stagnation, excuses lose credibility. When improvement appears, humility preserves balance. Truth becomes easier to accept because it is no longer hidden in abstraction. The most important change arrives gradually. You stop chasing emotional highs as proof of progress. You begin to trust slow, steady refinement of thought. The mind becomes less impressed by temporary confidence and more committed to durable clarity. Over months and years, the record of your thinking growth becomes a personal archive of transformation. It tells a story not of perfection, but of struggle guided by awareness. It reveals seasons of discipline, periods of drift, and moments of return. This record is more honest than memory because it was written in real time. Eventually, the act of tracking becomes less about the numbers and more about the posture of attention it creates. You learn to observe yourself without hostility. You study your responses without distortion. You measure without obsession. Discipline settles into quiet precision. Tracking thinking growth with metrics is not about becoming mechanical. It is about becoming deliberate. It is the difference between wandering and walking a chosen path. The numbers do not command you. They inform you. They do not define you. They reflect you. In the end, awareness is the true measurement. Metrics simply sharpen its edge. When you see your own evolution clearly, you move with greater intention. Thought becomes less accidental. Reaction becomes less impulsive. Character becomes less imagined and more practiced. The mind that learns to measure its own progress becomes harder to deceive and easier to improve. Each reflection becomes a point of reference. Each adjustment becomes a quiet victory over confusion. And through this steady attention, the invisible architecture of disciplined thinking is slowly, relentlessly built. Number 7. Read across disciplines for leverage. Most people read within the narrow walls of what already feels familiar. They choose books that confirm what they believe, sources that echo their profession, and ideas that fit neatly into existing opinions. This feels comfortable. It also quietly limits growth. The mind becomes efficient at repeating itself but weak at adapting. Reading across disciplines breaks this trap. It forces the brain to operate in wider fields, to make uncommon connections, and to see reality from angles it would never encounter through specialization alone. Leverage is created when one stream of knowledge strengthens another. A person who understands only one domain relies entirely on that single tool. A person who draws from many disciplines carries a full toolbox. When challenges appear, they possess multiple ways to interpret, analyze, and resolve them. This does not happen through random reading. It happens through deliberate exposure to ideas that stretch perception. Every discipline trains the mind in a different way. Mathematics sharpens precision. History cultivates perspective. Psychology deepens emotional awareness. Philosophy refines judgment. Biology reveals patterns of adaptation. Economics teaches trade-offs. Engineering develops systems thinking. Art expands sensitivity to nuance. When these ways of thinking interact within a single mind, intelligence becomes flexible rather than rigid. Reading across disciplines reshapes how problems are approached. Instead of seeing obstacles in isolation, the mind begins to recognize structures, incentives, feedback loops, and hidden variables. A challenge at work is no longer just a career issue. It becomes a systems issue, a human behavior issue, a resource issue, and a timing issue all at once. This layered perception creates strategic advantage. The greatest breakthroughs in history rarely came from isolated thought. They emerged when ideas from different fields collided. Innovation is often born at the edges where disciplines overlap. When you expose your mind to those edges daily, you position yourself where insight naturally concentrates. Specialization creates depth. Cross-disciplinary reading creates breadth. Depth without breadth becomes narrow. Breadth without depth becomes shallow. Leverage is created when both exist together. You retain mastery in your core area while expanding your capacity to interpret and apply ideas from many directions. One hidden benefit of reading across disciplines is humility. Encountering unfamiliar fields reminds the mind how much remains unknown. This awareness weakens intellectual arrogance. It replaces certainty with curiosity. The Stoic understands that wisdom grows not from claiming knowledge but from continuously expanding one's understanding of ignorance. Cross-disciplinary reading also disrupts mental rigidity. When you study only one worldview, it becomes the default lens through which all experiences are interpreted. Alternative explanations are unconsciously dismissed. Exposure to contrasting frameworks dissolves this rigidity. You realize that many of your convictions are not universal truths, but contextual interpretations. This discipline also improves communication. When you can draw analogies from multiple fields, your ideas become clearer to others. You can explain a complex business concept using a biological process. You can describe emotional resilience using a physical principle. These bridges strengthen influence because they translate understanding across different minds. Reading beyond your field also reveals how the same principle reappears under different names. Feedback in engineering mirrors consequences in life. Equilibrium in physics echoes balance in character. Incentives in economics resemble motivations in psychology. When these patterns repeat across domains, their legitimacy deepens. You begin to recognize universal laws operating beneath surface differences. Another transformation occurs in creativity. The imagination feeds on contrast. When exposed to diverse inputs, it produces combinations that would never arise from uniform material. New solutions become possible because new raw elements are present. Creativity is not created by force. It emerges when varied knowledge is allowed to interact freely. Cross-disciplinary reading also strengthens critical thinking. When you understand how different fields test truth, you become less vulnerable to false certainty. You notice when someone presents opinion as fact, correlation as cause, or assumption as proof. You learn to ask better questions because you have seen how knowledge is built in many domains. This practice also deepens patience. Complex fields cannot be mastered quickly. Exposure to their difficulty trains respect for gradual understanding. You become more tolerant of confusion and less addicted to immediate clarity. This patience spreads into every area of life, strengthening long-term discipline. Reading across disciplines also refines judgment about authority. You see how experts can be brilliant in one field and deeply mistaken in another. This teaches discernment without cynicism. You respect expertise where it belongs and remain skeptical where it overreaches. This balance protects independence of thought. There is also a moral advantage to this habit. Understanding multiple perspectives reduces cruelty born of narrow judgment. When you see issues through social, psychological, economic, and historical lenses at once, condemnation gives way to comprehension. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it refines your response to it. You act with firmness guided by understanding rather than by blind reaction. The mind trained in only one mode of thinking responds to life with limited tools. The mind trained across disciplines carries versatility. It adapts when familiar strategies fail. It does not break when one framework collapses because others remain to support it. Cross-disciplinary reading also strengthens self-education. You become less dependent on formal structures to dictate your learning. You design your own curriculum by curiosity and relevance. This independence reinforces self-trust. You no longer wait for permission to expand your mind. Another subtle benefit is the reduction of fear toward the unfamiliar. Many people resist new ideas because they feel threatening. When the mind regularly enters unfamiliar intellectual territories, novelty loses its power to intimidate. The unknown becomes an invitation rather than a threat. This habit also reshapes identity. Instead of defining yourself solely by profession or role, you begin to see yourself as a learner of life itself. This broader identity is more resilient. When one role changes or collapses, the learner remains intact. Reading across disciplines sharpens strategic thinking. You begin to anticipate consequences not only in direct lines, but in complex chains. You consider second-order effects. You recognize unintended outcomes. This foresight protects against many costly errors. The practice also strengthens internal coherence. When you observe similar principles recurring across many fields, they become anchors for your worldview. Your values feel less arbitrary because they are supported by diverse forms of evidence. Conviction deepens without hardening into dogma. The Stoic understanding aligns naturally with cross-disciplinary learning. Wisdom is not confined to one source. It is gathered wherever truth appears. The disciplined mind does not ask whether an idea belongs to a preferred domain. It asks whether the idea strengthens judgment and character. Cross-disciplinary reading also counters intellectual boredom. When the mind grows tired of one subject, another reignites curiosity. This rotation preserves long-term engagement with learning. Growth continues not through force but through renewed interest. As this habit matures, you begin to notice links between inner discipline and external systems. You see how psychological patterns mirror economic cycles. You recognize how biological adaptation resembles personal resilience. You observe how engineering redundancy resembles emotional buffers in life. These parallels deepen self-understanding because life itself appears more interconnected. Another important outcome is improved decision-making. Under complexity, the world rarely presents problems that belong cleanly to a single category. Most challenges are mixtures of human behavior, limited resources, time pressure, and uncertainty. A mind trained across disciplines naturally organizes these complexity layers without panic. Cross-disciplinary reading also challenges cultural conditioning. Ideas from other times, places, and systems reveal how many current assumptions are shaped by environment rather than truth. This awareness loosens unconscious conformity. You become less likely to mistake popularity for validity. There is also a strengthening of inner freedom. When your thinking has many reference points, you are less dependent on any single narrative for meaning. You are not emotionally held hostage by one ideology, one group, or one explanation. This freedom stabilizes character under pressure. The discipline of reading beyond one's immediate interests requires deliberate effort. The familiar always competes for attention. Yet each time you choose the unfamiliar, you strengthen the muscle of curiosity. Curiosity, when disciplined, becomes one of the most powerful engines of lifelong growth. Over time, this practice quietly reshapes how you interpret success and failure. You no longer view progress only through the lens of one domain. You see how skills transfer. You recognize that growth in one field often strengthens capacity in another. You begin to evaluate your development more holistically. Cross-disciplinary learning also sharpens the ability to synthesize. Instead of memorizing isolated facts, you build integrated frameworks. These frameworks guide action when information is incomplete. They allow you to act wisely without waiting for perfect certainty. One of the deepest transformations occurs when you stop seeing disciplines as separate compartments and begin seeing them as languages describing the same underlying reality. Nature, society, and the human mind follow patterns that repeat under different names. When you recognize these patterns, understanding becomes unified rather than fragmented. The practical result of this unity is leverage. A concept learned in one field multiplies your effectiveness in several others. Effort yields greater return because each lesson strengthens multiple areas of thought at once. In the end, reading across disciplines is not about becoming an expert in everything. It is about becoming adaptive in anything. It is about becoming adaptive in anything. It trains the mind to move fluidly through complexity, to recognize structure beneath chaos, and to respond with depth rather than impulse. This habit quietly prepares you for a world that refuses to remain simple. While others cling to narrow expertise and struggle when conditions shift, you carry a wider internal map. You navigate change with steadier footing because your understanding does not rest on a single pillar. To read across disciplines for leverage is to refuse confinement of thought. It is to gather tools from every field that sharpens judgment, strengthens character, and widens perspective. It is the steady construction of a mind that can stand firmly in many worlds without losing its center in any of them. Number 8. Design habits that compound wisdom. Wisdom rarely arrives in dramatic flashes. It is not delivered in instant revelations or sudden transformations. It grows the same way character grows, quietly, consistently, and through repetition that seems small in the beginning. People often chase wisdom as if it were a destination they can reach through a single book, a single mentor, or a single breakthrough moment. In reality, wisdom is the long result of daily habits that steadily shape how you think, choose, and respond. What compounds is not knowledge alone, but the way that knowledge is used over time. Every habit is a vote for the kind of mind you are becoming. Some habits shrink awareness by pushing the mind towards speed, comfort, and avoidance. Other habits enlarge awareness by training patience, attention, and reflection. The difference between a life ruled by impulse and a life guided by wisdom is not a difference of intelligence. It is a difference of design. What you repeat without thinking eventually becomes how you think. Most people design their habits accidentally. They react to environment, routine, and pressure without deliberate structure. Habits form anyway, but they form around convenience and stimulation rather than around clarity and growth. Designing habits that compound wisdom means interrupting this accident-based living and choosing patterns that strengthen discernment across years, not just across days. Wisdom compounds when habits align action with reflection. Action without reflection breeds recklessness. Reflection without action breeds fantasy. The habit that unites both becomes a powerful engine of maturation. Small daily practices that encourage learning, observation, restraint, and correction quietly refine judgment in ways that force never could. The foundation of compounding wisdom is consistency, not intensity. Rare bursts of discipline impress the ego but leave little trace on character. Small repeated acts carve channels through the mind. The Stoic understanding accepts that greatness is not built through emotional motivation, but through calm repetition of what is known to be right. A habit that compounds wisdom does more than improve skill. It strengthens perception. It changes how you interpret experience. Over time, you begin to recognize patterns where others see randomness. You respond with deliberation where others react with impulse. This change comes not from gifted insight but from trained attention. Wisdom compounding habits are rooted in three qualities: simplicity, sustainability, and self-correction. Simplicity ensures the habit survives busy days. Sustainability ensures it endures seasons of fatigue. Self-correction ensures it evolves rather than stagnates. Habits that collapse under pressure never compound. They reset. Designing such habits begins with understanding that the mind is shaped more by environment than by intention. What is easy to do will be done often. What is difficult to access will be avoided. Designing for wisdom, therefore, requires arranging life so that reflection, learning, restraint, and review are the path of least resistance. A habit that compounds wisdom also protects against emotional extremes. It gives the mind a stable rhythm during chaos. When stress rises, the habit remains. When motivation fades, the habit continues. This stability is not rigid, it is grounding. It acts like an anchor that prevents the mind from drifting with every emotional tide. One of the quiet functions of wise habits is delay. They train the ability to pause before acting. This pause becomes a filter between impulse and choice. Over time, this single delay saves years of regret. The habit of pausing does not announce itself dramatically. It simply prevents countless invisible mistakes. Another compounding habit is deliberate review. The mind tends to move forward without looking back. Experience accumulates, but judgment does not always deepen. Review transforms experience into instruction. Without review, life repeats its lessons with increasing intensity. With review, the lesson is learned once and carried forward. Wisdom also compounds through selective repetition. Not every habit needs to be repeated daily, but the foundational ones must be. Habits that sharpen awareness, strengthen character, and clarify intention deserve daily expression. When these habits are neglected, wisdom plateaus. When they are repeated, wisdom accelerates. The design of habits must account for human weakness rather than pretend it does not exist. A system that depends on perfect discipline will collapse under ordinary pressure. A system that assumes imperfection yet guides behavior anyway will endure. Designing for wisdom means building habits that work even on days when energy is low and focus is scattered. One of the dangers in habit design is aiming for visible productivity rather than inward refinement. You can appear successful while remaining mentally undisciplined. Wisdom does not always announce itself through external performance. It reveals itself through calm under pressure, restraint under temptation, and clarity under confusion. Wisdom compounding habits also balance input with output. Endless consumption leads to overload. Endless output leads to exhaustion. The mind requires periods of absorption and periods of articulation. This balance ensures that learning does not remain abstract and that action does not become hollow. Another critical aspect of compounding wisdom is the habit of slow evaluation. The modern world rewards speed. Wisdom rewards timing. The habit of delaying judgment until sufficient understanding appears prevents countless errors of haste. Speed feels powerful. Timing is powerful. Habits that compound wisdom also protect values. Values without habits remain fragile ideals. Habits translate values into lived reality. If honesty is valued but never practiced deliberately, it remains theoretical. If discipline is admired but never reinforced through routine, it remains a wish. Habits convert belief into behavior. The environment in which habits live matters as much as the habits themselves. Noise erodes reflection. Distraction fragments memory. Excess choice drains resolve. Designing for wisdom often requires subtracting what weakens the mind before adding what strengthens it. Removal is not loss, it is clearance for growth. Compounding wisdom habits also cultivate long-range thinking. They reorient attention from immediate comfort toward future stability. Each repetition strengthens the ability to sacrifice short-term ease for long-term integrity. This trade becomes easier over time because the mind grows familiar with delayed reward. Emotional resilience also grows through such habits. Resilience is not built through avoidance of difficulty, but through measured exposure guided by structure. When habits anchor you during discomfort, you learn that hardship can be endured without collapse. This knowledge cannot be given, it must be practiced into the nervous system. Another silent effect of wisdom compounding habits is the thinning of illusion. Repeated self-observation weakens self-deception. Repeated correction strengthens self-honesty. Over time, you see yourself with greater clarity. This clarity is not always pleasant, but it is always liberating. These habits also reshape how you experience success. Achievement without wisdom breeds arrogance or emptiness. Achievement guided by wisdom breeds grounded confidence. The difference is not in the outcome but in the internal posture that accompanies it. When habits compound wisdom, the mind becomes increasingly self-governing. External rules become less necessary because internal order strengthens. You are less dependent on supervision, reward, or fear. Integrity grows quieter and stronger. Another benefit often unnoticed is the improvement of relationships. A mind shaped by wise habits listens more fully, speaks more carefully, and reacts more proportionately. Conflicts are resolved with less residue. Trust deepens because behavior becomes predictable in the best sense, stable in value. These habits also refine the sense of proportion. Minor inconveniences stop feeling catastrophic. Major challenges are met without drama. The emotional scale recalibrates. This steadiness is mistaken by some for indifference, but it is actually clarity free from excess. Compounding wisdom through habit also strengthens faith in process. You stop demanding immediate transformation. You trust gradual refinement because you witness its results. This trust stabilizes motivation. You act without constant emotional reward because progress is no longer tied to feeling inspired. The danger to avoid is complacency. Habits can compound wisdom or compound stagnation depending on what they reinforce. Repetition alone is not enough. Repetition must serve refinement. Wise design includes periodic reassessment to ensure habits are still aligned with growth rather than merely familiar. Another subtle risk is performing habits mechanically. When practice becomes mindless, wisdom plateaus. Attention keeps habit alive. Awareness keeps it fruitful. Even the smallest routine regains power when performed with presence. The deepest compounding occurs when habits shape not only behavior but identity. You no longer feel like someone trying to be disciplined, reflective, or patient. You begin to see yourself as such. Behavior becomes expression rather than effort. Over time, the accumulation becomes unmistakable. Decisions are made with greater calm. Mistakes are corrected with less shame. Success is received with less arrogance. Failure is faced with less despair. These changes are not dramatic in isolation. Together, they define a transformed orientation toward life. Designing habits that compound wisdom is not about controlling every moment. It is about guiding the direction in which moments accumulate. Each day becomes a small deposit. Each month becomes visible interest. Each year becomes a testament to quiet design. The true reward of such habits is freedom. Not freedom from effort, but freedom from confusion. Not freedom from challenge, but freedom from needless struggle. The mind becomes a steadier place to live. Wisdom that is not compounded fades into memory. Wisdom that is compounded becomes character. Character shapes outcome without announcing itself. The outside world changes slowly in response, but the inner world changes with certainty. In the end, you are not the architect of a single decisive act. You are the architect of the patterns that quietly govern countless acts. To design habits that compound wisdom is to accept that destiny is not shaped by what you do occasionally, but by what you practice repeatedly. Through these repetitions, the ordinary days become the builders of an extraordinary mind. Number 9. Challenge comfort zones with experiments. Human growth occurs outside the boundaries of comfort. The mind naturally seeks ease and predictability because evolution rewarded survival over experimentation. This instinct, while protective, quietly limits potential. Comfort zones feel safe, yet they are the subtle traps that keep talent, character, and insight from expanding. True expansion emerges when you treat life as a laboratory, when you conduct experiments on yourself and your environment, when you intentionally enter situations that provoke uncertainty, risk, and reflection. Experimentation is not recklessness. It is the disciplined practice of testing limits, observing outcomes, and integrating lessons. Challenging comfort zones requires awareness. The first step is recognizing where ease has become a cage. It shows up in repeated routines, predictable responses, and avoidance of unfamiliar tasks. Comfort zones feel invisible because they are woven into daily life. Breaking them demands attention to repetition and the courage to perceive stagnation as an opportunity rather than a flaw. The act of experimentation in personal development is deliberate. It is not about randomly seeking chaos. It is about defining boundaries that have become habitual and stepping slightly beyond them to observe effects. This can be as simple as starting a difficult conversation, taking a route you have never walked, tackling a problem without guaranteed success, or adopting a new skill that feels awkward. Each small experiment stretches perception and builds resilience. Discomfort teaches faster than ease. When the familiar fails to provide answers, the mind activates latent capacity. It notices patterns previously ignored, questions assumptions, and uncovers resources hidden by routine. Experiments create feedback loops. You act, observe, adjust, and internalize. This cycle, repeated consistently, transforms fear into competence. Another crucial aspect of experiments is framing failure as information. Most people avoid stretching because failure feels like defeat. Experiments redefine failure. Each unsuccessful attempt becomes data. What did not work illuminates a path forward, highlights blind spots, and strengthens problem-solving skills. The Stoic recognizes that external results are secondary. Growth is measured in awareness and refined action. Experiments also recalibrate courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. By systematically challenging comfort zones, the mind grows accustomed to uncertainty. Each small victory accumulates, gradually expanding the threshold for discomfort. Over time, risk feels less like a threat and more like a teacher. This practice also develops adaptability. Life rarely conforms to plan. The more often you place yourself in novel situations, the more quickly you learn to navigate unexpected circumstances. Experimentation trains flexibility in thought and behavior. Rigid patterns are exposed as fragile. Versatility becomes a natural byproduct of repeated testing. Experiments need structure to be effective. Random risk-taking is draining and often unproductive. Begin by defining variables. What habit, skill, or belief will be tested? What conditions will be altered? What is the desired learning outcome? Structure transforms chaos into inquiry. The experiment becomes a tool, not a gamble. Observation is the critical companion to action. Without attention, experiments are wasted effort. Watch responses, emotional reactions, and outcomes with honesty. Notice how you resist, how you adapt, and how assumptions are challenged. These observations are the raw material for insight. The mind that observes itself grows exponentially faster than the mind that simply acts. Comfort zone experiments also strengthen humility. No matter how skilled or knowledgeable, new situations expose gaps. Recognizing these gaps without defensiveness cultivates realistic self-assessment. Humility does not diminish confidence, It strengthens learning by making the mind receptive to feedback. The compounding effect of experiments appears over time. A single act of stretching may feel insignificant. Repeatedly stepping beyond habitual limits trains instinctive courage, problem solving, and clarity. The mind gradually rewires itself to perceive challenge as opportunity. What once provoked anxiety becomes familiar terrain for growth. Experiments also foster creativity. Novel situations force unconventional thinking. When familiar strategies fail, improvisation emerges. Constraints imposed by comfort reveal hidden solutions when they are removed. Habitual ease dulls the imagination, deliberate discomfort sharpens it. The discipline of experimentation includes reflection and integration. Observing outcomes is not enough. Lessons must be synthesized into action. What worked? What failed? How will understanding shape the next step? This iterative process ensures growth is cumulative, not scattered. Wisdom emerges not from raw experience, but from analyzed experience. Another aspect of challenging comfort zones is emotional regulation. Experiments provoke anxiety, uncertainty, or embarrassment. Practicing calm observation during these moments strengthens emotional resilience. Each encounter with discomfort becomes a rehearsal for mastery under pressure. The mind also develops confidence in uncertainty. As repeated experiments yield small victories, trust grows in one's own problem-solving and learning capacity. This confidence is not the arrogance of certainty, but the quiet assurance that challenges can be navigated through reflection and disciplined action. Experiments expand perspective. By stepping into unfamiliar environments, engaging with diverse people, or confronting unknown tasks, assumptions are questioned. The narrow lens of routine is replaced with a wider view. Cognitive flexibility grows, and rigid patterns of thought weaken. Challenging comfort zones also builds initiative. The habit of waiting for perfect conditions or certain outcomes diminishes. Action becomes a natural response to opportunity rather than a response to compulsion. Initiative compounds because each small act of courage lowers the barrier to the next. Another profound effect is the integration of body and mind. Physical experiments, like endurance, skill practice, or novel physical tasks, train awareness of limits and capacity. The body becomes a teacher, revealing that adaptation is possible through persistent, disciplined exposure. Mind and body reinforce one another in the development of resilience. Experiments create internal evidence of growth. Unlike theoretical study, which may not produce tangible results, personal experiments provide observable proof of capability. Each success, partial success, or failure teaches the mind to measure reality accurately, rather than rely on assumption or comfort-driven illusion. The habit of experimentation also nurtures patience. The mind learns that mastery is incremental, that results are rarely immediate, and that repeated attempts yield compounding understanding. Impatience is countered by the tangible rhythm of trial, observation, and adaptation. Challenging comfort zones strengthens ethical character. When experiments involve moral dilemmas, difficult conversations, or unfamiliar social dynamics, they test courage, empathy, and integrity in real time. These trials are not hypothetical. They shape the conduct of the mind and heart. Over time, experimentation becomes a mindset rather than a tactic. The mind continually seeks opportunities for testing, stretching, and refining. Risk is no longer threatening but instructive. Challenge becomes an expected part of life rather than an interruption to ease. The habit of experimentation also cultivates resourcefulness. Familiar methods may fail under new conditions. The repeated necessity to improvise develops the ability to find solutions under constraint. Resourcefulness becomes instinctive, not learned under pressure. Experiments refine judgment by testing assumptions, observing consequences, and adjusting behavior. The mind learns to discern what is useful, true, or effective. Decision-making becomes informed by evidence rather than habit, comfort, or inertia. This practice also develops resilience to criticism. When stepping beyond comfort zones, the risk of external judgment increases. The disciplined mind interprets critique as data rather than insult. The capacity to withstand scrutiny grows, reinforcing independence of thought. Another effect is the sharpening of self-awareness. Experiments illuminate habitual patterns, emotional triggers, and cognitive biases. Each encounter with the unfamiliar reveals how the mind reacts under pressure, fear, or uncertainty. Self-knowledge accumulates with each deliberate challenge. Experimentation also accelerates adaptation to change. Life is unpredictable. Habits of stepping into discomfort prepare the mind to respond effectively rather than react chaotically. Flexibility becomes a practice skill rather than a hope. Ultimately, challenging comfort zones with experiments transforms identity. You are no longer someone defined by avoidance or routine. You become someone defined by inquiry, courage, and adaptability. The self expands not through theoretical ambition, but through disciplined, observable action. The greatest reward of this practice is freedom. Freedom from fear of failure, from dependence on certainty, and from habitual limitation. The mind trained through systematic experiments moves confidently in uncertainty, perceives opportunity in challenge, and cultivates wisdom through direct experience. This is not a path of ease, but it is a path of growth. Each experiment, no matter how small, is an investment in the ability to think, act, and respond beyond the habitual boundaries. By testing limits deliberately, the mind becomes a laboratory of development, each discomfort a teacher, each risk a stepping stone, and each outcome a lesson for a life designed to expand relentlessly. Number 10. Filter noise to amplify insight. The modern mind is bombarded constantly. Every day, information floods in from screens, conversations, notifications, and media. Opinions collide, data accumulates, and distractions multiply. Without discernment, this constant noise overwhelms the mind, dulling judgment, scattering focus, and eroding clarity. Insight requires attention, reflection, and the capacity to recognize what truly matters. To amplify insight, the first step is learning to filter the noise deliberately, to distinguish signal from clutter, and to create mental space for meaningful thought. Noise is not only external. Internal chatter, worries, assumptions, compulsive thoughts, and habitual reactions can be as disruptive as social distractions. The mind reacts to every impulse, every emotional trigger, and every passing idea as though it were equally important. Filtering noise begins with recognizing the difference between urgent, trivial, and essential. Urgency is often deceptive. What screams for attention rarely contains wisdom. Clarity emerges when judgment is applied consistently to what receives focus. Filtering noise requires boundaries. The mind functions best when input is selective. Constant exposure to streams of unrelated information leaves patterns hidden and reasoning fragmented. Deliberate attention must be protected. This does not mean isolation from reality, but rather careful selection of what is allowed to enter and shape thought. Reading, listening, and observing with intention produces far more growth than passive absorption of all available content. Another critical aspect is the prioritization of quality over quantity. One well-chosen book or article can provide deeper understanding than hundreds of superficial ones. One concentrated conversation can reveal more than endless small talk. Depth matters more than volume because insight emerges from integration, not accumulation. The mind must have time to digest, connect, and reflect. Without reflection, information remains inert. Noise filtering also involves patience. The temptation is to seek immediate answers, instant clarity, or rapid transformation. Insight rarely manifests in haste. It grows when the mind has been left to absorb patterns, to compare ideas across contexts, and to notice subtle connections. Deliberate removal of distraction accelerates this process by providing uninterrupted space for observation and synthesis. A critical technique is to define non-negotiable cognitive spaces. These are periods or environments where attention is reserved for thought that advances understanding, reflection, or creative synthesis. During these spaces, interruptions are minimized, superficial inputs are avoided, and the mind is free to engage deeply with the substance that matters. Repeatedly creating these conditions strengthens the habit of focused awareness. Filtering noise is also a matter of mental triage. Not all information is equal. Some inputs are critical, some are useful context, and some are purely distortion. The disciplined mind evaluates sources for relevance, credibility, and alignment with meaningful objectives. Exposure to trivial or manipulative content is minimized not out of avoidance of reality, but out of respect for the finite capacity of attention. Internal noise can be managed by cultivating self-discipline in thought. Reflexive judgments, habitual mental narratives, and reactive emotional patterns consume attention that could be used for insight. Observing these impulses without acting on them, questioning assumptions, and redirecting thought to what is essential are forms of mental housekeeping that preserve clarity. Over time, the mind learns to respond selectively rather than react compulsively. Another dimension of filtering is simplification. Complex problems often appear overwhelming when the mind is cluttered with irrelevant variables. By stripping issues down to their core elements, insight becomes visible. Simplicity is not ignorance. It is the distillation of complexity into understandable patterns. This distillation process requires both courage and patience because it demands ignoring seductive, but ultimately distracting detail. Noise filtering also strengthens perception of causal relationships. In a cluttered mental environment, correlations are mistaken for causation, coincidences for trends, and rumors for evidence. By selectively attending to data that truly matters, the mind develops accuracy, patterns emerge more clearly, and the ability to anticipate outcomes strengthens. Judgment becomes less reactive and more deliberate. Creating physical and digital environments that reduce noise is also vital. Cluttered spaces, constant notifications, and multitasking fragment attention. Silence, order, and focus provide the mental scaffolding for insight to take shape. External discipline supports internal discipline. By shaping surroundings intentionally, the mind is allowed to concentrate on high-value cognition. Another benefit of noise filtering is the strengthening of discernment. As distractions are reduced, the mind becomes sensitive to subtle cues that others overlook. Small patterns, weak signals, and overlooked relationships emerge more clearly. Insight is amplified not by more information, but by increased sensitivity to what is already present. The trained mind recognizes what truly deserves attention. Filtering noise also trains patience with uncertainty. In the absence of constant input, the mind becomes comfortable with incomplete information. It learns to wait, observe, and integrate before reacting. This tolerance for uncertainty is essential for strategic thinking, problem-solving, and long-term judgment. Noise encourages premature conclusions. Silence encourages insight. The habit of reflection is a crucial companion to filtering. Without time to examine, analyze, and connect, even selected inputs can fail to produce growth. Reflection converts raw data into understanding. Regular review of experiences, decisions, and readings transforms information into integrated knowledge. Filtering noise ensures that reflection is meaningful rather than distracted. Noise filtering also heightens creativity. When the mind is not constantly bombarded, it can form connections across domains, synthesize patterns, and explore possibilities that remain invisible under constant distraction. Creativity thrives in a vacuum of unnecessary input. Stillness is the soil from which original thought grows. Insight amplified through filtering also cultivates emotional resilience. Noise often distorts perception, inflates fear, and exaggerates minor threats. The disciplined mind interprets events more accurately, reacts more proportionately, and maintains composure under pressure. Emotional intelligence grows when mental inputs are chosen and processed consciously, rather than reacted to impulsively. Another effect is deeper learning. Habitually engaging with high-quality, relevant material and resisting the pull of distraction allows knowledge to integrate more fully. Memory strengthens, understanding deepens, and the mind becomes capable of applying concepts flexibly. Information is no longer scattered. It becomes a tool for reasoning. Filtering noise also improves decision-making. When the mind is overwhelmed, decisions are rushed, reactive, or based on incomplete perception. By reducing clutter, judgment operates with greater precision. The mind can weigh options, consider consequences, and anticipate outcomes with clarity. The quality of decisions rises with the quality of attention. The habit of filtering noise is strengthened by regular evaluation of inputs. Not every source remains valuable. Not every conversation remains useful. Periodically reassessing what deserves attention ensures that the mind is continually tuned to relevance and truth. This prevents drift and maintains the focus on amplifying insight rather than accumulating clutter. Long-term, the practice of noise filtering reshapes perception itself. The mind begins to intuitively recognize distractions, trivialities, and distortions without conscious effort. Focus becomes habitual. Insight becomes the default response to stimuli, rather than the exception. This transformation is gradual but irreversible with consistent practice. Filtering noise also sharpens self-awareness. By consciously deciding what to attend to, the mind observes its own tendencies, biases, and preferences. Self-knowledge strengthens because attention is directed, deliberate, and reflective rather than scattered and reactive. Internal insight becomes as refined as external understanding. Another subtle advantage is the reduction of cognitive fatigue. Constant exposure to irrelevant stimuli consumes mental energy, reducing capacity for analysis and reflection. By eliminating noise, the mind conserves resources, allowing deeper thought, longer concentration, and more effective problem-solving. Energy is invested where it produces value rather than dissipating in distraction. Filtering noise also cultivates a sense of control over mental life. The mind that is habitually bombarded feels reactive, victimized by circumstance. The mind that chooses focus feels sovereign. Autonomy emerges naturally when the flow of information is intentional rather than chaotic. This discipline also supports long-term learning and expertise. Experts are distinguished not just by knowledge but by the ability to focus deeply on what matters. By eliminating distractions, the mind creates the conditions for mastery. Noise obscures nuance. Filtering reveals it. In practice, filtering noise is ongoing. It is not a one-time act, but a daily commitment. Each day brings new distractions, new trivialities, and new distortions. Vigilance, consistency, and self-discipline maintain clarity. The payoff is cumulative. Small, repeated acts of discernment amplify understanding over time, creating a mind capable of seeing deeply, thinking clearly, and acting wisely. Ultimately, amplifying insight through noise filtering is not merely about attention. It is about cultivating the inner conditions for wisdom. By consciously selecting inputs, protecting focus, reflecting on experience, and integrating lessons, the mind becomes a refined instrument. Complexity is understood, patterns are recognized, and judgment is sharpened. In a world of constant distraction, the deliberate mind achieves clarity, depth, and the ability to act decisively. Insight, once drowned in noise, begins to resonate, and the quiet power of a focused mind transforms not only understanding, but the course of action itself.